everyone, it's Krystal here from the Christine Sampson Music and Art Studio, and this is the Vocalise Geek episode 6. So today I wanted to talk about the difference between falsetto and head voice. Have you ever had the experience of when you're singing a song and you're trying to hit a high note, and you're starting perhaps on a lower note and you're trying to hit a high note, and you feel like the only way to hit a high note is to do one of two things. You either shout or scream or just get really loud on the high note, or you feel like you have to switch or crack into a different sound altogether. So for example, if I were singing like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, somewhere, you hear that that little flip, and you hear me struggling through the middle, that little crack, and the sound that I went into, that sort of breathier, emptier kind of tone, that's what we call falsetto. So the difference between falsetto and head voice has to do with the structure of the vocal folds and how we're using them as we're singing. So if there's one takeaway that I want you guys to get out of this video, is this idea of airflow resistance. It's really important for a singer to understand what it feels like to appropriately resist air when we're singing. So in falsetto, not enough of the vocal fold structure is coming together, not enough pressure being applied to resist the air that's coming up from the bottom, from underneath it. So essentially you can think of there being a leak happening. So if I were singing and I suddenly went to falsetto, the vocal folds sort of went, and it sort of got looser. You can think of it that way. And there's a lot of seeping and escaping of air, which makes it very difficult to control our tone, amongst other things. So the difference between that and head voice, there is an appropriate amount of adduction. There's an appropriate amount of pressure being applied by our vocal folds to resist the air, which creates a nice, solid, comfortable tone in our voice. So if I, for example, if I were to sing from the bottom of my voice to the top, and you can hear I went from the bottom of my voice, the chest voice, through the middle, through my upper registers, my head voice, and then I went all the way back down, and I didn't struggle in the middle, and you didn't hear any crack or sudden changes of vocal tone, and it just sort of sounded like one continuous sound. So using falsetto in a song is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it can often sound really cool, especially, for example, if you're a fan of like R&B. You'll notice a lot of singers will go into falsetto for stylistic effect. But the problem is if you're going into falsetto and you don't even want to, like that's the only way that you can feel like you can hit a high note, then that's probably a good reason to work on achieving head voice as opposed to falsetto. Also, falsetto is not a very healthy form of vocal production. It's not very good for the voice. It's a little bit abrasive on the vocal folds. And also, if your goal is to build power and strength and healthy volume in your voice, that's virtually impossible to do if you're constantly going into falsetto uncontrollably. And let me explain why. In falsetto, I talked about before, it sounds a little empty. There's a lot of air coming through. There is an absence of what many vocal teachers call a core. And this core is essentially this sound. That is the sound of the vocal folds coming together. So in connected voice, going from chest voice connected into head voice, there is this core sound. But if I'm in falsetto, you hear that core sound, that is pretty much gone. This is important because it is from that core sound, that edgy kind of quality that is that you see that is present in a connected voice and in head voice, where you're gonna be able to build healthy volume and strength and power in your voice. I just realized that the that edgy sound probably is a little weird for a lot of people who may be watching this video for the first time, or hearing this for the first time. I'm super used to it because I teach it every day, but I understand that it sounds weird, but a lot of vocal exercises sound weird. So if you get used to the weirdness and try not to judge yourself, you'll actually be able to get through to developing your voice much more quickly. So how do I create that sound? How do you develop that quality of that core in your voice so that you can increase your range and build power and strength in your tone? Well, first of all, just try out that creaky sound anywhere on the bottom of your voice. If you're familiar with these kinds of exercises already, you may have heard it being called the vocal fry, and essentially is this idea of the vocal folds coming together and resisting air. And when you try that a couple times and you get comfortable with it, you can try to slip in more sound. Can become and then eventually you can maybe modulate your pitch, so sliding up to a slightly higher note. So again, this sounds weird and a little bit crazy, and I have a lot of students that will sort of do this. Like they have a little bit of problems really catching that feeling of the vocal folds coming together. Don't worry. This takes time to do, but once you get it, you'll be amazed at how why you didn't do it before. Another really cool way to practice this sound, access this sound, is by doing this. And I have to give a shout out to Chanel from Singing Success because she's the one that showed it to me first. And what you do is you pretend like you're underwater and you have to say something. And the word that you so desperately need to say while you're underwater is B, as in the letter B. So, because you're underwater, you can't open your mouth, so it would be this. So I have students that I've showed this to, and they're like, so you mean like vomiting internally? And I said, yeah, okay, you can think of it that way. I wouldn't think of it that way, but that's cool. But in a way it is. It's like, so one cool thing that's happening here is if you're doing it correctly, there's a lot of back pressure that's happening behind the lips, which is really encouraging you to use a lot of ab muscles. So this is a really cool way of getting that feeling of air pressure resistance. So if you're trying this, what you could do for guys, just you can start sort of around here, and you can just go, just follow the piano that way. So as I'm doing this exercise, I feel like I'm using a ton of ab muscles. I'm feeling that, a lot of resistance of air coming up here. And as I'm going through those notes there, that's through the male's first bridge. That part is going to be really tricky for a lot of guys. As you're singing, you may start to feel a little bit of tension, there's a lot of clamping feeling happening in your throat. What can help is just to be aware of keeping some space in the mouth. So you notice when I was doing the exercise just now, I was dropping my jaw. I was kind of going, and I was making sure that I have this deeper sound. It's like I'm pressing down into my voice as opposed to, yanking it up like, as opposed to doing that. For girls, you want to do it on this, around this, maybe start right on this key and do the same thing. And same thing, I'm keeping a lot of space in my mouth. Eventually when you get comfortable with this, you can add a sound to it, and the sound I would recommend doing is ba. So for guys, you would be on this range and go ba 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 ba. But for girls, you start maybe here and you go becomes ba 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 ba, and I'm still keeping in mind that idea of that kind of quality. In a way, you can think of it as crying, like you're really sad and you're crying your eyes out. You eventually can keep going up to your high notes. What you don't want to do is suddenly go from with that kind of nice tension that you're building up to and you can see that my vocal folds just flipped out and went a little bit nuts, and I went into falsetto. So if you find that's happening, go back down to a little bit lower and start again. Maybe you want to go back to the sound to really solidify and really practice that that sort of core quality feeling in your voice. So there's a couple more exercises related to this that I would like to show you guys, but I'm going to save that for the next video because otherwise this one is going to be way too long. And if you guys have any questions or comments, shoot me a message. I hope that was helpful. See you next time.